The NBA playoffs are here. Johnny Talk Sports here to bring you my NBA playoff predictions. And there are two things to know about the NBA playoffs: they're predictable and they're rigged. And I'll get to the rigged part in just a moment. But first, let's go through the bracket. And of course, I will start with the play in tournament. Starting with the Western Conference, the 9-10 in the West, the Pelicans and the Spurs. And I like the Spurs to move on in that game. Timberwolves and the Clippers, the 7-8. And I like the Clippers to move on, and the Clippers become the 7 seed in the Western Conference. So now we have to decide the 8 seed between the Spurs and the Timberwolves, and I like that game going to the Timberwolves, as I have the Timberwolves as the 8 seed. Moving on to the Eastern Conference now, the Hawks and the Hornets, the 9-10 in the East, and I have the Hawks moving on to that game, and they take on the loser of the Nets and Cavaliers, and I think the Nets are going to get past the Cavaliers in this game. The Nets' playoff experience alone is going to propel them in this matchup. So the Nets move on to become the 7 seed in the East, and now the Hawks and Cavaliers square off for the 8 seed in the Eastern Conference, and I like that to go to the Hawks. I just think that the Hawks run from last year, I think that is some confidence for this season, and they move on to the 8th seed in the East. So now the play-in tournament is out of the way. On to the rest of the bracket, starting with the Western Conference. The Suns and the Timberwolves. I think the Suns move on and they get past the Timberwolves with ease. The Timberwolves, they may get one game, but that's about it. The Mavericks and the Jazz. It feels like every year the Jazz are a team that many think could surprise some people and make a run, that they're an actual contender. And then we see them choke in the playoffs. And I think this is going to be no different. I have the Mavericks winning this series, and I have it going all the way to 7 games. The Warriors and the Nuggets. I think this is going to be a very competitive series here. I think the Warriors win this series, but I just think that the Nuggets are going to give the Warriors a bit of a hard time here. I think the Warriors only take it in 6. The Grizzlies and the Clippers, with the reports that Kawhi Leonard isn't progressing as much as they want him to, or they're hoping for these playoffs, I like the Grizzlies. I think the Grizzlies move on in 5 games. The Heat and the Hawks. And I think the Hawks are going to actually give the Heat some trouble in this series. I think that the Hawks, they have what it takes to win a game or two in this series. And the Heat will move on, but it's not going to be a clean sweep. I think the Heat only win it in about 5 or 6. But I'm thinking more of 6, because all season long, the Hawks, they've overachieved against the tougher teams, but they play down to their competition against the weaker teams in the league. So Heat move on. 76ers and the Raptors. And I think the 76ers win this series in 6 games. The Bucks and the Bulls. I think it's going to be the Bucks in 5, maybe even a clean sweep. I know the Bulls are having a really good season. They're in the playoffs. But this is the defending champions that we're talking about. I think the Bucks, they get past the Bulls here. The Celtics and the Nets. And I think the Nets, they upset the Celtics here. I think it's going to be 6 games that the Nets beat the Celtics in. So now we're on to the second round, the Suns and the Mavericks. And this is going to be a great series as far as ratings-wise is concerned, because Luka Doncic is a part of this series with the Mavericks, and he's always an exciting player to watch. But it's about the team as a whole when you get to the playoffs. Not really about the individual as much as the team. I think the Suns, as a collective unit, get past the Mavericks, I think, in a clean sweep. I think the Suns in 4. The Warriors and the Grizzlies. I think the Warriors get past the Grizzlies in 5 games. So I have Suns and Warriors in the Western Conference Final. The Heat and 76ers. I have the 76ers moving on in 7 games. And the Bucks and the Nets. Now, this is going to be what I think the matchup that decides the Eastern Conference. Because I think no matter who wins this matchup between the Bucks and the Nets, beat the 76ers in the Eastern Conference Final. And when we look at the teams that I have left here, the Suns, Warriors, Bucks, Nets, and even the 76ers, I think those are the only 4 to 5 teams in this playoffs that would have a compelling storyline if they were to win the entire thing. I mean, the Warriors, Steph Curry gets ring number 4. The Suns, they redeem themselves after last year. The Bucks go back to back. The Nets, Kevin Durant gets it done without Steph Curry, without having to join a super team. In the Warriors and the 76ers, it would be talked about, the James Harden trade would be talked about all offseason long if the 76ers won. So those are the 5 teams that have a compelling storyline if they won it all. But I think the Nets are going to win this series. I think it goes down to 7 games once again this year. So the Eastern Conference Final had the 76ers and the Nets. But I will say that whoever wins between the Bucks and Nets, they're going to the NBA Finals. But I do know that series will go down to 7 games. Western Conference Finals, the Suns and the Warriors. And I think the Warriors win this in 7 games. I think it goes all the way down to 7 in this one. I think it's going to be a series that is going to be a dogfight from game 1 to game 7. But I think the Warriors come out on top. And the Eastern Conference Final, the 76ers and the Nets. And I have the Nets moving on to the NBA Finals. My NBA Finals matchup, the Warriors and the Nets. And winning the NBA Finals, I have the Golden State Warriors winning it in 5 games. I just feel like that the Warriors are going to get past the Nets here with ease. Plus, it sets up the storyline of Steph versus KD in the NBA Finals, which I think that is the biggest storyline to potentially look out for in these NBA playoffs, because the NBA and all other sports in general, all they care about is storylines. But I could see Warriors and Bucks to set up a storyline of the Warriors versus Giannis. Or they can always give us the rematch, which I don't necessarily think they'll give us the rematch here. But those are my NBA playoff predictions. Comment your predictions down below. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until next time.